Our top item in the What Went Well column with 5 dots says the sprint allowed us to focus. Does anyone want to elaborate on this? I will, answers Josh. That was originally my item, but apparently a lot of people agreed. In the past, I've often been assigned to work on a high priority task one day, only to be reassigned by someone else to another, apparently more important task the next day. It sometimes happened again the following day or even later in that same day. This meant that I usually didn't have the chance to get deep enough into any one task to ever make progress on it, and the first person who assigned the task to me was usually mad at me when they found out that I had been asked to work on something else. The whole experience was really frustrating, but it just seemed to be the way that we operated as a company. But by locking in 2 weeks worth of work, I was able to get deeper into the problems that I was solving. Not only has this made me enjoy coming to work each day more than I have in a long time, but I know that I've finished more work in the past 2 weeks than I have since I've been here. I couldn't agree more, adds Peter. There aren't near as many testers at Globomantics as there are engineers, so we're constantly pulled in a dozen different directions to make sure that everything the engineers produce is properly tested. Testing can be tough because you often don't know how long it will take you to thoroughly test an item until you've had the chance to interact with it for a bit. Before, I constantly found myself having to start over on items that were changed while I was busy working on something else. But over the last 2 weeks, I've been able to focus exclusively on the items that our team has produced. This means that I have a lot more confidence in the depth of my testing, and therefore much more confidence in the work that we're creating as a development team. These are great points, adds Louise. It sounds like everyone's experience with the concept of the sprint as a locked time box was very positive. Is there anything that we can do to build on this success in the next sprint? After a moment of quiet consideration from the team, Priyanka offers, I don't think so, as it seems to be working very well as it is. But there are a lot of other teams in the organization that could benefit from this concept. Maybe we could look for opportunities to make the benefits that we're gaining from working in sprints more public so that others are aware of it. That's a great idea, answers Louise, and he adds a sticky note to the third column of the board with the title, Make the Benefits of the Sprint More Public. It looks like we also have an item with 5 dots in the What Could Be Improved column. The title of this sticky note is Inconsistent Quality Across Backlog Items. This one sounds pretty important. Can someone tell us more about it? I can, answers Priyanka. This is something that I noticed near the end of the sprint when we were trying to get every item that we had selected for the sprint finished before the sprint ended. While I think we did a great job on the items in the first half of the sprint, I can think of a few items near the end of the second half that just weren't treated with the same level of professionalism that I know we're capable of. For example, Peter's a great tester, but I know that there were a handful of small tasks that we discouraged him from testing because we just didn't think that they were important enough for him to take the time to do so. And at least one of those tasks caused a major issue that had to be addressed over lunch before our sprint review. I know what she means, adds Josh. Another example is our code review process. Priyanka and I have agreed that whenever one of us completes the coding for an item, the other will do a quick peer review of the code just to look for basic things like duplication with something elsewhere in the code base or simple mistakes that the original writer of the code may have missed. We were good about sticking to that agreement at the beginning of the sprint, but as we neared the end of the sprint, most of the items were placed in the test column without the other engineer even doing so much as a basic glance over it. As both Priyanka and Josh lean back in their chairs, Louise says, Thank you both for bringing this up. It took a lot of courage to share your concerns with the team. But based on the number of dots on this item, you were far from the only people who had these concerns. I think we now understand the issue at hand. Can anyone offer any thoughts about how the issue is affecting us as a team? I can, says Dave, who is visibly upset. For one thing, it means that I'm not sure if the items that are in each product increment are actually releasable. This puts all of us in a tough position during each sprint review when we present the sprint items to the stakeholders and claim that each one is complete. Thank you, Dave, adds Alan. That's a very valid point. I'd like to weigh in on this item as well. Priyanka, you mentioned that this seemed to happen the most near the end of the sprint, as the team tried to ensure that they completed all items before the sprint was over. Thank you for bringing this up, because this is a very valuable piece of feedback for both Louise and I. This tells us that we weren't as clear as we could have been about the nature of the items selected for the sprint. The items that the team selects for the sprint are a forecast, they're not a commitment. And while we should make our best effort to complete every item that we selected within the confines of the sprint, that doesn't mean that we should sacrifice the quality that we're capable of delivering as a team, nor should we work at a pace that's not sustainable for us to do so. I'm very grateful that you brought this up, because the Scrum framework encourages us to base the amount of work that we select for future sprints off of the work that we delivered in previous sprints. Had you not shared your concerns with the team, we would have very likely selected the same amount of work for the next sprint in tomorrow's sprint planning session, which would start to establish a very dangerous precedent of the amount of work that could be completed in each sprint. Since we now know that the amount of work that we completed in this past sprint is probably not sustainable, we can adjust our expectations for the next sprint accordingly. Louise, this is also a great opportunity for you as a Scrum Master. The best Scrum Masters enable their teams to function at their highest potential by listening to what they need and providing the help that they're asking for. But along with listening to what the team is saying, you must also be listening to what they're not saying. There were likely signs of this occurring in the past few daily scrums that both you and I missed. For example, now that I'm thinking about it, I do remember Josh and Priyanka discussing code reviews several times at the first few daily scrums, but I don't recall this topic mentioned at all in the later daily scrums. I'm also sure that there were several items that passed into the done column of the board without Peter ever mentioning them. This should have been a warning flag to both you and I that not every detail was being thoroughly tested. Listening to what is not being said is a skill that takes time to develop, and it also requires an in-depth knowledge of the team's context to understand the subtleties that are missing, but it is a skill that all great Scrum Masters tend to have in common. Thank you for the feedback, Alan, answers Louise. Now let's talk about what we can do to try to address this problem. I can offer one idea to start. It sounds like we need to adjust our forecast of the number of items that we can deliver in a sprint downwards from what we forecasted for this sprint. That's a good idea, answers Alan. I'd also suggest that we consider being more explicit about everything that needs to happen before we consider an item done. This way, we're more transparent as a team when we say that we've completed an item, or we can have a meaningful discussion when we feel that an exception to our rules need to be made. I have an idea too, says Josh. Maybe if we know that we're starting to fall behind, we can have a working lunch 1 or 2 days in the second half of the sprint. At my last company, if we started to fall behind, the company would buy pizza and soda for everyone so that we could work through lunch and catch back up. Maybe we could do something like that here. As Louise nods in agreement, he adds a sticky note representing each of these 3 ideas to the third column of the board.